We often hear about the urgent need for more energy globally. But think about this. Africa and South Asia, huge populations, growing fast, and living standards are rising too.
Mm-hmm.
That means just an absolutely enormous increase in energy demand is coming.
It's unavoidable, really.
So today, we're diving deep into a study called Renewable Energy Enabling Pathways Towards Prosperity in Africa and South Asia.
It's a fascinating piece of research.
It really is. It looks at this compelling idea that the sun-drenched regions, right, could actually power their economic growth mainly with renewables.
And solar power is front and center there
Yeah.
because it's getting so cheap and it's just so available in those areas.
Exactly. And we'll also touch on this potential solar to X economy concept.
Which could be transformative.
So yeah, stick around. I think there's some surprising takeaways here about how these crucial parts of the world might just, well, leapfrog into a sustainable energy future.
Well, what immediately jumps out from this study, renewable energy enabling pathways towards prosperity in Africa and South Asia, is just the sheer scale of the demographics.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. The research points out Africa's population is growing faster than anywhere else globally, and South Asia, already the highest population density on the planet.
Wow.
Think about this. Back in 2020, they already made up, 41% of the global population combined?
Almost half the world, even then.
And the projections. They climbed to half the world's population by 2050, and then possibly 60% by 2100.
60%.
And remember, these are also the regions with most of the least developed countries, and the majority of people who still don't have access to electricity.
So the scale of the energy challenge, it just hits you when you put it like that.
It really does.
But then this study, it offers a bit of hope too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A counter-narrative.
It does, yeah. It points to some real successes. Think about the rural electrification programs in places like Bangladesh and India.
Right. They've made huge strides.
Exactly. So despite those immense challenges, there's clear proof that progress is possible, that people can be connected to power.
Okay, so progress is happening. But what about their overall energy use right now?
Well, in 2020, their combined share of global total primary energy demand, TPED, is actually pretty modest. About 7% for Africa, 10% for South Asia. That's what the study notes.
So way below their population share.
Way below. But the study, looking at macroeconomic projections, expects that to change. It suggests their energy consumption per person will likely rise.
As living standards improve.
Precisely. And eventually sort of catch up with their population share, maybe around 2150, based on these long-term projections, assuming parity.
2150 is a long way off, but it really highlights the need for sustainable solutions now, doesn't it? Solutions that can scale up massively.
Absolutely. Scalable, sustainable, and efficient. That's the key.
Okay, let's dig into something this study touches on, this idea of leapfrogging. What does that actually mean in practice?
It's a really important concept, and this study emphasizes it. Basically because these regions haven't built out massive amounts of, say, coal-fired power plants or extensive fossil fuel pipelines like Europe or North America did.
They don't have as much old stuff to replace.
Exactly. They have less legacy infrastructure baggage. So they have this unique chance to sort of bypass those carbon-heavy stages of development.
Interesting.
They can invest directly in cleaner, more modern energy systems right from the start. It avoids that whole costly, slow process of phasing out old polluting tech.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about how vulnerable both Africa and South Asia are to climate change impacts.
Oh, absolutely. More droughts, devastating floods, extreme weather. They're really on the front line.
And as this study reminds us, their historical contribution to the greenhouse gases causing this, it's been tiny, relatively speaking.
Exactly. But here's the risk, and the study flags this clearly. As living standards rise, as economies grow, energy demand will soar. Now, if that demand is met mainly by fossil fuels, well, you could see a huge new wave of global greenhouse gas emissions.
So these regions could become major contributors to the problem,
Yeah.
even though they didn't really cause it historically.
That's the potential danger the study warns about, fossil fuel lock-in. So shifting to renewables isn't just about climate change globally.
It's about their own future, too.
For sure. It's crucial for their energy independence, for building infrastructure that can actually withstand climate shocks and, tackling the horrible air pollution and water supply issues many communities already face.
Okay, so let's talk solar. Solar PV. The study really puts a spotlight on its potential in these Sunbelt regions, right?
Oh, definitely. This study heavily emphasizes the sheer abundance of solar resources across both Africa and South Asia.
Hmm.
I mean, the potential energy you could generate, even with 2020 solar tech, let alone future improvements,
Yeah.
the numbers are just vast.
Huge numbers.
But this is important. The study points out a key structural difference between the two. South Asia,
Yeah.
much higher population density, right? And in some areas, slightly less intense sunshine compared to parts of Africa.
Right.
So what that means is the per capita yield potential, how much solar energy you can generate per person for a given amount of land, is quite a bit lower in South Asia than in Africa.
Ah, I see. So same-size solar farm, potentially serving fewer people relative to the population in South Asia compared to Africa.
Sort of, yeah. Or needing more land relative to population to get the same per capita energy. That's a really important distinction the study makes.
Makes sense. So plenty of sun in both places, but the practicalities of harnessing it efficiently are different.
Precisely. But despite that difference, the research on 100% renewable energy systems, which this study references, it generally points to solar PV becoming the dominant primary energy source for both regions by mid-century.
The backbone, essentially.
Backbone, yeah. But of course not the only player. Wind, hydro, bioenergy, maybe some geothermal. They'll all be part of the mix to make it resilient and diverse.
And the study puts this into perspective with a comparison, doesn't it? Using Europe's energy use.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison. It looks at Europe's energy demand per person in 2020 and asks, okay, what if Africa and South Asia reach similar levels as they develop?
And the land area needed.
That's the key takeaway. Africa, even with its much larger projected future population, might only need a relatively small percentage of its land for renewables to meet that demand, maybe less than 0.5% in some scenarios.
Wow, that seems manageable.
It does. But for South Asia, because of the factors we mentioned, density, slightly lower per capita yield potential, it might need a more significant chunk of its land or, really push hard on other strategies.
Okay, that sets the stage really well.
Yeah.
Let's shift focus slightly to the actual renewable solutions available now. The study talks about growth rates.
Yeah, it highlights the incredible growth we've seen globally in deploying solar PV and wind power. The compound annual growth rates over the last decade or so, they've been really remarkable.
And it's not just about subsidies anymore, is it? The study mentions cost competitiveness being the main driver now. That feels like a massive shift.
It is a huge turning point, absolutely pivotal, and this study really underscores that. Yes, government support helped kick things off, no doubt.
Good.
But the dramatic, ongoing fall in the cost of these technologies, especially solar PV, it just makes them the smart economic choice in more and more places.
Even without support.
Often, yes. I mean, look at 2021 figures mentioned in the study. Solar PV alone was about half of all new power capacity installed globally. All renewables combined, a massive 85%.
85%.
And the study notes similar positive trends for batteries and electrolyzers, too. They're crucial pieces of the puzzle, and their costs are also coming down.
So if these trends hold, what does the future electricity system look like according to this research?
This study suggests we're heading towards a global power supply with very, very high shares of renewables by mid-century. Potentially an almost completely renewable power system in many places.
And cheaper electricity overall.
That's the expectation in the study, yeah. As these super cheap renewables push out older, less economic low-carbon options, the overall cost of supplying electricity could actually decline.
And it's not just about electricity for lights and appliances, right? The study talks about electrifying the whole energy system.
That's a crucial point. The falling cost of renewable electricity makes it increasingly attractive to electrify everything possible just for better overall system costs.
Like electric cars.
Exactly. Direct electrification, like EVs, is way more energy efficient than burning stuff. But for the tricky sectors, long-haul shipping, aviation, some heavy industries that need chemical feedstocks.
Things that are hard to just plug in.
Right. That's where the study brings in indirect electrification. Using renewable electricity to make things like e-fuels, e-chemicals, e-hydrogen.
Okay.
These can then substitute for fossil fuels in those hard-to-abate sectors. And the study suggests this combination could push electricity's share of total primary energy demand incredibly high, maybe up to 90% in the long run.
90%? Wow, that's a fundamental restructuring of energy.
It really is. This study sketches out this emerging energy industry system where most energy is used directly as electricity.
The efficient way.
And the rest is met by these indirectly produced molecules, all powered by renewables, plus some bioenergy, geothermal, solar thermal for resilience and diversity.
Which brings us to that term, power to X, or for these regions?
Solar to X. That's what this study logically calls it for Sunbelt regions. Harnessing that abundant solar power to make X fuels, chemicals, materials, whatever's needed.
Okay, so let's make that concrete. For Africa, what does a solar to X economy actually look like based on this study?
Well, the study gives a kind of flowchart for a hypothetical 100% renewable system in Africa. Solar PV is the workhorse, obviously.
Generating the initial electricity.
Right, but because the sun doesn't shine all the time, you absolutely need storage. Batteries are key for smoothing things out, providing power overnight.
Makes sense.
Then you need electrolyzers. They use that renewable electricity to split water and make green hydrogen.
And that hydrogen is useful how?
As an energy carrier itself or as a building block, you use it maybe with captured CO2 to synthesize e-fuels like e-kerosene for planes, e-methanol for ships, or e-chemicals like e-ammonia for fertilizer and industry.
Got it. And the study says a similar structure applies to South Asia.
Fundamentally, yes. The core components, massive solar storage, electrolysis, synthesis would be similar, just adapted to South Asia's specific resources and needs.
So it's about taking that primary solar energy and converting it into all the different forms we need, fuels, chemicals. The study even mentions materials.
Exactly. These power-to-X routes, the study details, can provide clean heat using electric boilers or heat pumps. They can desalinate seawater using renewable power, huge for water stress, power EVs, obviously, and yet create those essential e-fuels and e-chemicals.
And e-materials.
The study touches on ongoing research there, using renewable power and maybe captured CO2 to create new materials, even desalination-driven afforestation. It shows how broad the potential application is.
It sounds incredibly promising, but yeah, there's a catch. The study points out a research gap.
A significant one, yeah. This is a really critical observation in the study. When you look at all the academic papers analyzing these 100% renewable energy systems,
Where's the focus?
overwhelmingly Europe. Something like 60% of the published articles focus on Europe.
And Africa and South Asia?
Much, much less. Around 8% for Africa, maybe 6% for South Asia, according to the study's review.
That seems disproportionate, given their population and future energy needs.
Hugely disproportionate. And the study emphasizes if you adjust for population size, the gap is even more stark. There's just a concerning lack of deep, region-specific analysis for Africa and South Asia compared to, say, Europe.
And the study warns this could be a real problem, right, for
Yeah.
policymaking.
Absolutely. It argues that this lack of detailed research could mean policies aren't as well informed as they should be. You might miss the best pathways, the specific challenges, the unique opportunities in these regions.
Because what works in Germany might not be the perfect fit for Nigeria or Bangladesh.
Precisely. The study really stresses the urgent need for more focused research on Africa and South Asia, for Africa and South Asia, to build a solid base for discussion and effective policy.
Okay, so bearing that in mind, let's dive into the transition options the study does discuss. And it rightly reminds us there's no single Africa or South Asia.
Exactly. Huge diversity within each region, different countries, different resources, different starting points. But the study does pull out some aggregated insights. Let's start with Africa.
What's the focus there?
Well, this study highlights that global attention on Africa's energy transition is definitely increasing.
Why now?
A few things converging. Africa's high vulnerability to climate change, existing energy access issues or crises in many nations, plus that rapidly growing demand we talked about. And global events like energy price shocks have just amplified the urgency.
Makes sense.
And the study rightly says, whatever transition happens, it must align with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement.
And the role of renewables.
There's a strong consensus emerging in the literature, which this study confirms. Renewables, especially solar, can meet the vast majority of Africa's future energy needs. The solar resource is just exceptional.
So projections show solar taking a lead role quite soon.
Yeah, some projections cited suggest solar PV could dominate Africa's electricity generation mix even by 2030.
But didn't we just say the 100% renewable studies for Africa are limited?
Correct. This study, referencing literature reviews, confirms that detailed 100% RE system analyses for the whole continent are still relatively few. It's early-stage research compared to Europe.
So what's seen as the key technology for getting there faster?
The study points strongly to solar PV, often paired with batteries, PV battery hybrids, because they're modular, scalable, and getting cheaper all the time.
And the study itself did some modeling for Africa.
Yes, it draws on its own comprehensive analysis covering 24 African regions. That work confirms the vital role of solar PV continent-wide, but also shows how the optimal mix will vary regionally, depending on local wind, hydro, or other resources.
What about the cost? Does transitioning to renewables actually save money? The study compared policy scenarios, right?
It did. It looked at the levelized cost of electricity, LCOE, and total system costs in 2050 under two scenarios. One is a best policy scenario, BPS,
Sure.
really pushing renewables,
Yep.
and the other is a current policy scenario, CPS, more like business as usual.
And the result?
Really striking. In the BPS, driven by cheap solar, the cost per unit of electricity is significantly lower than in the CPS, which relies more on fossil fuels with ongoing fuel costs.
So renewables win on price.
In this analysis, yes. And interestingly, the total annual system cost in the BPS, which achieves carbon neutrality, is only moderately higher than the 2020 baseline. But the CPS, total costs roughly triple by 2050, mostly due to rising fuel expenses.
That's a powerful economic case for the renewable path.
It really is a strong argument against fossil fuel lock-in.
And the study also mentioned Africa's potential as an exporter, green energy carriers.
Absolutely. This is a major potential upside highlighted in this study. Given Africa's vast, largely untapped renewables, especially solar and ample land, it suggests Africa could become a major global supplier of green e-fuels, e-chemicals, maybe even e-materials. A whole new green industrial opportunity.
Like green hydrogen.
Exactly. The study cites IEA projections suggesting Africa could be a world leader in green hydrogen, potentially exporting it competitively to Europe maybe as early as 2030.
Wow.
And the study provides cost projections for electricity and e-hydrogen in Africa by 2050 that support this. It really frames it as a potential solar-to-X export economy.
What about getting power to people who don't have it now? Rural areas. The study mentioned off-grid solar.
Yes, that's crucial. Decentralized systems, solar home systems, mini-grids are seen as vital for rapid rural electrification.
Why them specifically?
Because they're modular, costs have plummeted, and you can deploy them much faster than extending the main grid over vast distances, which can be incredibly expensive.
Right.
The study discusses these different approaches: home systems for basic needs, mini-grids for communities, strategic grid extensions, and stresses the need for good regulations, especially around mini-grids and how they might connect to the main grid later.
And it's not just about lights, is it? It's about livelihoods.
Totally. The study emphasizes that shifting to renewables for all energy needs improves lives. Access to modern energy for businesses, communication, but also clean cooking and heating.
Getting away from burning wood or charcoal indoors.
Exactly. Which has huge health impacts. The study specifically mentions solar home systems powerful enough to run efficient electric cook stoves as a viable solution there.
Okay, great insights for Africa. Now let's pivot to South Asia. The study highlights a different set of challenges and opportunities there, yes?
It does. South Asia's context is distinct. The study acknowledges its historically low contribution to emissions, but points to this recent rapid surge in fossil fuel dependence.
Driven by...
Massive population growth, fast economic development. India, especially, is projected to see the biggest jump in energy demand globally in the coming decades.
Which creates huge pressure.
Huge pressure. Energy security, affordability, plus they're highly vulnerable to climate change impacts already. So the study stresses that shifting to renewables is just crucial for them to manage these risks.
But again, the research base is thinner for South Asia compared to the global north.
That's what the study finds, yes. Fewer deep dive studies looking specifically at high renewable pathways for South Asia compared to, say, Europe or North America.
And specifically on 100% renewables for South Asia.
Also quite limited, according to the study's review. Not many papers analyzing 100% RE for the region as a whole, or even for individual countries, relative to the global literature.
But despite that gap, there's some consensus on solar's role.
Yes, definitely. The consensus, highlighted in the study, is that solar PV will be a major, likely dominant player in South Asia's future electricity mix. Again, driven by falling costs and good solar resources across much of the region.
What about the monsoon? Doesn't that pose a challenge for solar? All that cloud cover.
It does, yeah. It's a known challenge. But the study discusses ways to manage it.
Such as?
For a large country like India, better grid connections between regions are key. You can import power from areas where the sun is shining. Also, boosting wind and hydro generation where those resources are strong during monsoon months.
Makes sense. Diversification.
Exactly. And in specific cases, like Bangladesh, the study mentions potentially using synthetic natural gas, made from renewables, in existing gas plants for backup. For island nations like the Maldives, maybe wave power. Sri Lanka has good wind resources.
So solutions exist.
Solutions exist. The overall message from the research cited is that South Asia can achieve a 100% renewable power system with lots of solar balanced primarily by batteries.
And India's role in all this seems critical for the region.
Absolutely pivotal given its size. This study refers to research showing low-cost solar PV forming the backbone of the cheapest electricity mix across nearly all Indian states.
Supported by batteries for balancing.
Supported by batteries for managing peak loads and ensuring stability, yes. And the study suggests that integrating e-hydrogen and e-fuels could allow for even higher shares of solar in the total energy mix down the line.
Does it vary much state by state in India?
Somewhat, yes. States with good wind or hydro resources naturally see higher shares of those in their optimal mix, according to the research cited. But solar is the consistent base everywhere.
And the cost implication for India? Cheaper power with renewables?
The evidence cited in the study points that way. The levelized cost of electricity from a 100% renewable system in India could potentially be significantly lower than the cost from the existing system back in 2020. It's becoming the economic path.
The study even looked at cities, right? Delhi is a case study.
Yes, that's interesting. With South Asia urbanizing so rapidly, understanding the transition in megacities is key.
And for Delhi.
The case study cited and suggests a 100% renewable transition could bring big benefits, lower costs, much less air pollution, a huge issue in Delhi, lower emissions, and even new green jobs.
What about water stress?
Yeah.
India faces that too.
True. The study briefly mentions the potential of using renewable energy to power seawater desalination, offering a sustainable water source, especially for coastal areas.
And for other South Asian countries, is solar dominant there too?
Generally, yes. The study indicates high shares of solar PV expected across Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, though the exact mix varies with local resources. And it mentions innovative ideas like floating solar PV for land-scarce places like the Maldives.
Okay, let's look further ahead now. Post-2050, what does this study see for Africa and South Asia in the long-term energy picture?
Well, it projects they'll become increasingly central to global energy demand in the second half of the century. How central depends a bit on the scenario you look at, like how much economic convergence happens globally.
Okay.
Under scenarios with high equality, both regions could have the highest total energy demand globally, with Africa potentially even leading. Other scenarios show slightly lower demand, but still massive growth.
So what does that mean for solar?
It means, according to this study, that Africa and South Asia are set to become the world's biggest markets for solar PV deployment in the latter half of the 21st century, consistently across different scenarios.
The sheer scale must be immense. Does the study give figures?
It does provide projections for installed solar capacity in 2050 and 2100 under different scenarios. The numbers are huge, confirming their future market dominance.
But deploying that much solar, what about land use? We touched on this earlier.
Right. The study addresses this directly. For Africa, it suggests the land needed, while large in absolute terms, might only be up to about 0.5% of its total land area, which seems manageable.
Okay, and South Asia.
That's where it could get tighter. Because of the population density, the study estimates it might require up to maybe 5.4% of its land area under those high-quality, high-energy demand scenarios.
5% is quite a lot. So what are the solutions for South Asia?
The study lists several mitigation options, pushing R&D for even more efficient solar panels, really maximizing rooftop solar and integrating PV into building facades.
Using surfaces that are already built on.
Exactly. Also, agrivoltaics combining solar farms with agriculture, exploring offshore wind and maybe ocean energy, and potentially international energy trade, importing clean energy.
So challenges, but potential solutions too. But Africa is less constrained.
Much less constrained by land, according to this analysis, which not only makes self-sufficiency easier, but also reinforces that potential for exporting green fuels and materials.
Especially from North Africa, as the study mentioned.
Existing research focuses heavily on North Africa's export potential, yeah. But this study suggests this opportunity could extend to other parts of the continent, too, as costs keep falling.
Okay, wrapping up, let's talk strategic opportunities and challenges overall, as outlined in the study. What are the common threads?
Well, a common opportunity for both is continuing that push for electrification and grid access, primarily using solar and batteries, and learning from the past, meaning consciously avoiding getting locked into coal like many developed countries did, and carefully weighing the pros and cons of nuclear compared to plunging costs for renewables and storage.
What about transport?
Big growth expected there. So a huge opportunity to adopt electric vehicles, which slashes oil import dependency. But that needs strong grids and charging infrastructure. Maybe plug-in hybrids outside cities initially.
And the core message remains direct electrification.
As the least cost, most efficient solution where possible, yes. Driven by solar and batteries, complemented by other local renewables.
And the main difference remains land availability.
That's the key structural difference highlighted. South Asia really needs to focus on getting the most energy out of every square meter. R&D, rooftops, agrivoltaics, offshore.
While Africa's opportunity lies more in.
Leveraging its vast land and sun for those e-fuel, e-chemical, e-material exports. A potential green industrial powerhouse.
Does the study suggest a role for international organizations?
Yes, it suggests more concerted action from bodies like the IEA, IRENA, World Bank, UN, could help foster faster renewable adoption. Better coordination, maybe like the Energy Progress Report it mentions.
And the ultimate potential.
The study concludes both regions can achieve energy self-sufficiency with sustainable, low-cost renewables, phasing out energy imports and all the risks that come with them.
So while the specifics vary, the path is there.
The path is there. The key pillars identified are technology innovation, building the right infrastructure, effective policies, and attracting private investment.
So bringing it all together after this deep dive into renewable energy enabling pathways towards prosperity in Africa and South Asia, it's crystal clear. The huge future energy needs there demand a radical shift from fossil fuels.
Absolutely. And this study makes a compelling case that their amazing solar resources are the key enabler for this shift, powering this whole transition towards a solar-to-X economy.
Supported by those crucial advances in power-to-X technologies.
Right. And the potential for electrifying almost everything, driven by ever cheaper solar, batteries, and electrolyzers, it's just enormous. It really holds the key to sustainable development.
But we have to remember that critical point, the study raised that research gap.
We really do. The lack of detailed 100% renewable pathway studies specifically for Africa and South Asia is a real blind spot. We urgently need more analysis focus there to guide good policy.
And looking long-term, the study projects these regions becoming the absolute center of the global solar market.
Their role in the global energy landscape is just set to grow and grow as the century unfolds. They'll be the main markets driving solar deployment.
The strategic opportunities laid out in renewable energy enabling pathways towards prosperity in Africa and South Asia are pretty stark, aren't they? Electrification for cheaper, sustainable growth.
South Asia needing that intense focus on land efficiency.
And Africa's potential to become this major global exporter of green fuels and materials.
Yeah. This deep dive into renewable energy enabling pathways towards prosperity in Africa and South Asia really leaves you thinking, doesn't it?
It does.
Given that incredible solar potential and the sheer urgency of sustainable development, what are the most critical collaborations, the smartest investments needed right now to really kickstart this solar tax revolution across Africa and South Asia? How do we ensure it leads to a truly prosperous and resilient future for billions?
A huge question.
Yeah.
The journey toward that future, powered by the sun, as detailed in this study, and what's really only just beginning,